welcome to the Public Accountability Board. Just saying we do meet in very extraordinary circumstances with this dreadful COVID-19 affecting the whole of the country now. And of course today the shocking news that the Prime Minister himself is in intensive care. So it is a truly extraordinary place to be in. And what we're doing by continuing with PAB is to try to keep some sense of normality going for as long as we possibly can. Apologies for the late arrival of papers for some of you. As you probably realise, we've been trying to organise ourselves as an office to work from home, and that's involved some issues around IT. I think we're all sorted out on that now, but apologies for the lateness of some of those papers, and indeed the other way round, it means that some of the questions that we've had have been late as well. So we'll do what we can today. I'm going to see if I can find out who we've got dialing in. So this is a kind of start of the day register. If I can go to, first of all, the police and see who we've got. I think we have the Chief Constable.
I'm here, Alan. Good morning.
Hello, good morning. The Deputy.
Yes, here, good morning.
Hello, Mark. ACC David Hartley.
Dave's away. He's managing COVID issues, Alan.
Okay, so it'll be yourself rather than David.
Tim will introduce himself in a minute, Commissioner. He's now obviously picks up local policing, so he'll speak to the relevant paper for Dave.
Okay, ACC Tim Forber. Do we have Debbie Carrington?
Yes, morning.
Hello, Debbie. And do we have Chief Superintendent Sarah Pullman?
Yes, Dr. Billings, I'm here, thank you.
Hello, Sarah. And then we've got apologies from Lauren Poultney, Jackie Bland. Is Carrie here?
Yes, good morning, I'm here.
Hello, Carrie. Is there anyone else from SYP?
Yes, Commissioner, I'm here, Alison Fletcher.
Hello, good morning. And that's everyone, I think, from SYP. From the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner, Michelle Buttery.
Yes, here, Commissioner.
Hello, Erica Redfern.
Here, Commissioner.
Kevin Wright.
Yeah, here, Commissioner.
Sophie Abbott.
Good morning, Alan, yes, I'm here.
Hello, Sophie. Fiona Topless. No Fiona as yet. Sally Parkin.
Yes, Commissioner, thank you.
Hello, Sally. Is there anyone else from the OPCC?
Hi, Alan, I am here. Fiona, I think I was on mute.
Oh, Fiona, yes. You must have been on mute because we didn't hear anything. Right. Then we've got members of the public, or actually members of the Police and Crime Panel. I think we may have Julie Grocott. No?
Yes, good morning, Commissioner.
Oh, hello, Councillor Grocott. Professor Adrian James. Not sure about Adrian James. Okay. Do we have some members of the press? Let me just see. Is Paul Whitehouse on the line?
I'm here.
Hello, Paul. Gareth
Hello.
Dennison.
Morning.
From the Rotherham Advertiser. George Torr from Star.
Morning.
Hello. And then someone who has the initials TBC from Barnsley Chronicle. No one from Barnsley Chronicle. Right. Do we have the chairs of the panels at all? Steve Ragg from JIAC.
Yeah, good morning, Alan.
Hello, Steve. And Andrew Lockley from the Ethics panel.
Yes, I'm here, Alan.
Hello, Andrew. Have I missed anybody out? Excellent. Well, welcome everyone. I think we've done the register. And we've done welcome and apologies. This is item 1 on the agenda. Item 2 is announcements, and we've already said about it being recorded, hopefully, and uploaded onto the website. Item 3, public questions. There have been some questions, and I'll see whether we can take them now, whether we've got answers for them, because, as I say, they came in a bit late because the papers were late going out, and I'll look to the force to see whether they can answer some of these, and if not, we'll get written responses to people. So we've had a question from Professor Adrian James about domestic abuse, and it's quite a long question, but shortening it, perhaps if the Chief or Mark would like to respond to that. He's asking about domestic abuse. Indeed, Julie Gurcott is asking also similarly about domestic abuse. And essentially, it's about what is the force doing to protect victims of domestic abuse at this time when so many people are shut into their homes. Is any proactive work being done to make contact with known victims, to check on their welfare, offer support? Are officers who work in domestic abuse still operating, or are they being moved to other duties? I think the force can see where those questions are going. So, Chief, do you want to respond to that?
Alan, I think I'll pick that one up if I can. Mark Roberts, Deputy.
Thanks.
Just to reassure, and I'll pick the questions off as entirely as I can, and then if there's any supplementaries, obviously feel free. Just to reassure, the officers who work in domestic abuse units are still operating. They've not been moved to duties. As you can appreciate with COVID, and we'll probably come on to an update about the force preparations for that, we have planned a range of contingencies, because obviously police officers and staff, just like anyone else, are not immune to the effects of the virus. However, so far we've fared extremely well. The staff have been sensible but committed, and we've managed very good levels of attendance within the force, and we're still delivering the full range of services, so the public can be reassured that despite the challenges, we are offering the full range of service, and that includes domestic abuse. I mentioned we have got contingencies all the way up to significant staff levels of abstraction. You'll be reassured that even when we get to the most extreme circumstances, domestic abuse is one of the things that will continue to be prioritised with available resources. Domestic abuse in its own right has been a significant priority for the force. As is right, over the last couple of years, we have put significant effort into ensuring that we take positive action and support vulnerable people. Just as we enter this particular stage of the virus, our lead, Superintendent Shelley Helmsley, has been linked in with the College of Policing to ensure that we are cognizant and contributing to national best practice, so that everything we do is in line with that practice. Shelley is also the regional lead for domestic abuse, so she's been linked in with all our partners, police, voluntary sector and other agencies across the North East region, again, to coordinate and ensure that we are working well with everyone. Just an example of this is that South Yorkshire has shared its DVPN and DVPO, they're the Domestic Violence Protection Notices and Orders. We've shared our guidance nationally to ensure that forces can sensibly manage the need to use legislation to minimise the risk to domestic abuse victims, whilst being cognizant of the very recent coronavirus legislation. During the crisis, we've got a bespoke dashboard to track trends and performance around domestic abuse, to monitor incidents, and also ensure that any that are linked into coronavirus we're aware of as well. To support that work, the Force Intelligence Bureau is producing a weekly briefing, which includes an oversight of all crime, incident demand, including domestic abuse, and that briefing document, which goes to districts, also includes repeat victims and offenders in each district to ensure that we're giving support and, where necessary, monitoring offenders to look after people. You'll recall from previous PABS Commissioner that we took the decision to invest in a domestic violence protection order team. That reflected the fact that we were very proactive, one of the most proactive forces in the country at dealing with this, but that had created significant demand for our officers, and we were seeing officers being abstracted to court on a daily basis and sometimes spending the whole day in court waiting to present a DVPO application. That team that we've invested in went live on the 30th of March, so they will continue now to pick up that work and monitor and prosecute breaches. The team's been in contact with the court service, and it's been agreed how we're going to continue to work despite obviously the reduction in available slots in the local courts. I'm presuming we can all take it as a reassurance. To date, we've not seen a reduction in the applications to courts, and courts are still being supportive of the work that we're doing in this area. That's not been the case in all of the force areas, where courts seem to have been more concerned potentially around the possible homelessness of perpetrators, which seems to have had an impact on them issuing the orders. That's not the position here, and we've had good supports from the courts. Obviously, you'd be aware that we have the multi-agency risk assessment conferences. They're continuing to make sure that the most vulnerable people are getting the relevant support, and we're continuing to assess and support Blair's Law to make sure that people have the right to know, and the domestic abuse risk assessment team are proactive in identifying cases where we should be making victims aware to protect themselves. The briefing documents I mentioned have been going out to district neighbourhood and IOM teams to ensure that they continue to manage the most high-risk offenders, and that they are complying with the conditions of DVPO. The force arrest rate on attending incidents remains very positive as a trigger to action. Clearly, the current situation presents some challenges, and we have the scenario where you've got potential victims confined to a house with the offender. We are using the media to engage with potential victims to make them aware that we're still here to support. There'll be radio adverts going out which will highlight the process, so that if someone's under threat and they dial 999 for support, if they press 55 while they're on to the operator, then we'll be able to monitor what's happening. So if they don't feel able to speak, we'll be able to dispatch a police resource. As I say, between ourselves and support agencies, we are making ourselves available to potential victims of domestic abuse. So I think we've got a comprehensive approach. It's always been a priority for us, and it continues to be a priority for us despite the challenges we're currently facing with the virus.
Mark, thank you very much indeed. That was a very full and reassuring answer. There was and all my subsidiary questions, you answered them as well. Michelle, I wonder if you could just say something about what the office has been doing, the OPCC.
Sure, Alan. Just for members of the media, Michelle Buttery, Chief Exec and Solicitor to the PCC. 2 weeks before the measures were introduced, Alan, the commissioning manager in the OPCC wrote out to all service providers, because we could see what was on the horizon, asking them for business continuity arrangements, which are being reviewed as we go along with them. That includes your commission victim support services. We've also been in liaison with Rachel Staniforth, Joint Head of the Violence Reduction Unit. There was going to be a focus through grant activity on domestic abuse victims. She was concerned about the possibility of under-reporting for fear during isolation, self-isolation, etc., lockdown. So she's been working with Shelley Helmsley in relation to what more can be done in relation to that. We've also contacted all the commissioners within local authorities, domestic abuse commissioners, in relation to the provision of refuges, to find out whether there is sufficient accommodation in the local authority. That seems to be the case, although they've reported referrals are down. So it's a position that we need to keep under review in relation to the underreporting, but we are working with agencies, commission providers and the force to understand the issue and try and address it.
Thank you very much. I think taken together with that comprehensively answers the questions that we had around domestic abuse. We have had another question around the enforcement of the emergency powers, and specifically in relation to Page Hall. But the Chief Constable may take that up in the next item, urgent items, number 4, when I'll ask him to say something about the impact of COVID on the force and where we're at. So leaving public questions then and going on to item 4, urgent items, and I wonder, Chief, if you could just
Chief, and then you finish off.
Well, if I just open up with a few comments, Mark, and then I'll hand over to you, because I know you have pretty good detail as well, which might be beneficial to play into the meeting. But if I just open up by saying that, firstly, Mark's already pointed to the fact that whilst the force, like other large organisations, is suffering from a degree of abstraction amongst our own staff, so far, and we recognise, of course, there are difficult days to come, but so far the abstractions that we are experiencing are certainly very manageable. They are being almost entirely offset by a reduction in the general volume type demand that we normally experience. And so, of course, people will appreciate that when you close pubs and clubs and restaurants and you don't have football matches, these are things which generate a lot of activity that keep our people busy, that these things have fallen away is the offsetting quality, if you like, that I'm talking about in balancing up demand with availability of staff. And what that means is that we are still able to manage business as usual in the same way as we would otherwise aspire to do, but we are also able to pivot to the specific demand that is brought about by COVID. And that is both working with partner agencies and supporting them collectively to manage their business, but also to uphold the restrictions put in place by Her Majesty's government. Those restrictions, of course, are well understood by now by the public, but it is important that those restrictions are upheld. Insofar as the restrictions themselves are concerned, we submitted yesterday to government our assessment of broad compliance, and our take was that for the most part, and when I say for the most part, I mean in the case of the vast majority of the public, I think their response has been absolutely magnificent. There are very high degrees of compliance. People understand that the purpose of the restrictions is, at the end of the day, to save lives. This is about making sure that we protect vulnerable people. It is about making sure that the NHS do not become otherwise overwhelmed, so that they are capable of dealing with what is a very, very difficult time for all who work in the health service. I think people get that, and they have responded very well. Our approach has been on an escalating model around enforcement, and it is very, very much, in the first instance, to encourage people, to educate people. It is to engage with people positively in a friendly way, a helpful manner. Of course, we recognize that these restrictions are very difficult, and some people may not have grasped the full significance or the reasons for those restrictions. Of course, we take it upon ourselves to help them to understand the whys and the wherefores, and to make polite requests of people to comply. Again, in the vast majority of cases, even at that point, people are adhering to the advice and guidance of our officers. We have been very clear from the outset that enforcement is something which is provided to us now in legislation. And where it's necessary, of course, we will enforce the restrictions, because those restrictions are there for the protection of all. But it will be a last resort. We recognize absolutely that for the most part, we want to encourage a spirit in which people are all doing their bit, and we're all part of the big team. Therefore, the idea that we're going to run around sort of lashing out tickets and things is the last thing that we want to do. Frankly, we're all busy. These are worrying times, and we would hope that we don't get to that point. Hitherto, levels of enforcement have been very low. Of course, there have been a number of interactions whereby we have responded to reports from the public, as well as through our own observations where we've seen people apparently breaching the restrictions, where we have intervened, we have encouraged, advised, educated, and people have broadly been in compliance. Mark will have specific figures in and around formal enforcement, use of formal enforcement powers, but they are very, very low. And at least up until the weekend, we had not issued formal enforcement notices at all, which I think speaks very well to the way that the public are responding to this message. I think the two last points that I would make, firstly, we do recognize that the longer the restrictions are in place, the more the dreadful toll that this disease is taking on people, and hence the increased anxiety levels. And as we have to weather this particular storm until we can get to a place where the government are able to formulate an exit strategy, it may well be the case that people find that the restrictions become more and more and more onerous. Our plea is for people to stick with it. We've come a long way as a country, and we need to stick with it, because breaking with those restrictions prematurely will mean that our collective endeavours thus far will have been in vain, and there is simply no point to doing that. So we will continue to uphold those restrictions, but we ask for the public's continuing and, as I say again, magnificent cooperation in this regard. Specifically, as a last point in terms of Page Hall, we have had some issues in Page Hall. We have had issues where certain members of the community, perhaps not as well informed as they might be about the nature of the restrictions, have been some issues, frankly, in terms of language difficulties and understanding. Again, our officers have been intervening very proactively in bringing about a real focus on the education of those people, including the production of leaflets in foreign languages, for example, just to help people to properly understand what it is that the restrictions are about and why they need to be adhered to. And of course, we are engaged with community leaders, faith leaders, people from within those communities themselves who have the best ability, of course, to translate what it is that we're seeking to achieve and what needs to be done. And in that respect, we are seeing a very significant reduction in some of those concerns that were first addressed to us. But if at this point, Commissioner, I hand over to the Deputy, and Mark, if you could just follow that up with anything specific, please.
Yeah, thanks, Chief. I'll confess you've thrown me a slight curveball there, because I've not got the up-to-date figures around prosecution, but I will say that they are very small. And just to give reassurance, the type of people we are prosecuting or seeking to prosecute have included drug dealers, because we don't believe that dealing drugs to people on the street is an appropriate exemption from the legislation. So we've added that, and there have been situations such as people threatening or spitting at our staff or members of the public. So we are applying the legislation at the very much higher end, and as the Chief says, we are seeking to engage, and the public seems to have been very responsive to that. So I think it's the approach that we'll maintain, and as long as we get the buy-in from the public that we have thus far, we don't see any need to deviate from that policy, but the numbers have been very small. Just in terms of that, the Chief mentioned that whilst clearly we've had challenges of our own because of the virus, there have been considerable drops in crime around most categories, as you would anticipate, because of the nature of self-isolation. Given that, the press are here, we would say there are certain pleas from us. So, for example, when the legislation was initially announced, we had a big spike in demand at Atlas Court from people ringing up to ask us what the legislation meant. The point I'd make is that, look, we understand people being concerned, but that's really not what the police are here. And for when we are trying to manage demand, we would ask people not to make calls unless it is necessary, because we need to prioritise the calls and look after the people who really need our help and support. So, there is a thing can understand people's nervousness. Please don't ring us asking for interpretations of it because it's new law in any case, but that's not really our role to do that. We have set up a specific command structure. We recognise the threats that this was going to pose from a very early point of view. So ACC Hartley, who's not here for this meeting because he's at the Ops complex dealing with COVID-related matters. We've got a command structure with Dave as gold. There is a shadow structure, as you would imagine, so there's a reserve gold. We've got a silver, which is the next level of tactical command, with a couple of reserves for that. And then we've got a whole range of district and functional bronze, covering all aspects of service delivery. So we are managing a full service still, and that's supported by that command structure. We've got a dedicated cell based at Ops who are supporting every aspect of the operation, from responding to particular types of crime to making sure that we've got the logistical support with PPE, protective equipment for our staff, and that's giving 7-day-a-week coverage. We've identified a specific team who will deal with COVID-related matters wherever possible. So they've got enhanced briefings and access to equipment, and sadly we do need to face the fact that we are going to see an increase in fatalities. So again, there's provision there to make sure that we've got a dedicated team dealing with the increase that we're already experiencing in sudden death. I will just mention, and it's invidious to mention individuals by name, but I'll break the rule because we do really benefit, excuse me, from having our business continuity lead, Eric Murphy, who's an exceptional chap in his field. He leads on much of this nationally. He did a sterling job for us in the floods, and he's now supporting the response to the coronavirus in an exceptional way. As I mentioned earlier, we have pre-planned and scoped out the response at all levels depending on our own abstractions or whatever might happen, and there's detailed plans beyond anything that we're really expecting to have to deal with, but should we be unfortunate, the plans are there to deal with every eventuality. I'll just mention again some of our staff who are going above and beyond. Clearly, while some parts of the organisation are really busy, we've seen a drop in demand for others. So, for example, our media team are not as busy as they would normally be dealing with the variety of incidents. So they proactively took the step forward, and members of our media team have been trained and have been working as call handlers in Atlas Court. Our business change and innovation team, a really bright collection of people who normally look at all the changes we're going to make, the implementation of new structures, assess the demand so that the force is pitching its resources in the right place. They've been refocused and now working as part of the intelligence cell to do projections around what we might have to deal with. So if we need to amend shift patterns, if we need to adjust staffing levels so that we can get the very best assessment of what we're likely to face in terms of demand for us. So they've been refocused to support the operation to make sure that we're doing it in a very intelligent and intelligence-led way. Police, obviously, a key partner in the local resilience forum. Dave Hartley represents us on that, and Dave has been coordinating the SCG to work with a range of partners. The SCG now sits every day to make sure that we're responsive to what is clearly a fast-moving situation. Just to give a flavour of what the strategic coordinating group is looking at, and I think we do need to be candid about the implications of the challenge that we're facing. There are a variety of cells that work underneath the strategic coordinating group, each focused on different areas of business. So one of those is the excess deaths cell. We are anticipating and planning for an increase in sudden deaths. We're already seeing it for people dying out of hospitals. So there's a bespoke plan with all the relevant partners around that. There's a cell for humanitarian assistance, an economic and business cell, communications, social care, health, PPE distribution, and a shared view of intelligence and information. So there really is a significant structure working across the region and the county to ensure that we collectively give the best possible response to the current challenge. I hope that provides some reassurance, Commissioner, about the structures we've got in place. As I say, we are maintaining the full range of services across the force area, and we're doing it in a joined-up way with partners.
Mark, thank you very much indeed, and the Chief. I think it was a very full, very comprehensive set of answers, and I think hopefully it has given some considerable reassurance to the public of South Yorkshire that the police are maybe not getting on top of this. Is hard to say because it's such a fast-moving scene, but are working extraordinarily hard, very long hours. Very happy to mention Eric Murphin and note him in the minutes, which I hope we'll do, but also all members of the force, because everybody is working these long hours, difficult hours in situations where many people are putting themselves at risk by doing what they do, but that's not new for the police, of course. People might also like to know that I have regular dial-ins with one of the ministers, the policing minister, Kit Malthouse. We have that every Tuesday, all the PCCs across the country dial in, and we have an hour with him in which we can put our questions and queries and make our comments to him, and that will happen later on today, and that's been very useful. He's been very responsive, listens very carefully, takes notes, and then makes sure that his civil servants take action from those. So thank you very much indeed, and what a remarkably flexible police force we have, that they can, very quickly move from one mode of operating to another, but that's the nature of this fast-moving situation. But then we saw that in the floods as well, when you were also having to act very, very quickly and with, again, a changing scene. Thank you very much. That was urgent items, item 4 on the agenda. Moving down the agenda, item 5, items to be considered in the absence of the public and press. We haven't got any of those. Item 6, are there any declarations of interest? Item 7 are the minutes of the previous meeting of the Public Accountability Board. That was held on the 10th of March. I've just got one alteration there on item 15. This is contact with the public, and it talks there about 6,000 people being contacted. That should read 600. Apart from that, I'm not aware of anything in the minutes that needs correcting. Anybody want to make any comments about the minutes? So shall we move to matters arising and actions? Michelle, I think there's only the one, isn't there? And that's discharge anyway, is it?
Yes, discharge.
So we don't need to linger on that. Going then down the agenda to force performance against the police and crime plan. We're now on pages 13 to 24 of your pack, and this is a report from the South Yorkshire Police to myself. I think originally this was David Hartley who was presenting this, but I guess this is going to be Mark. Can I say, first of all, thank you very much indeed for the report. It is, again, it's a very full report, lots of interesting points in it. Just as a general point, in future we might use some sort of notation system for the report. It's quite difficult just pointing to paragraphs and saying it's the third paragraph down from the top. If they could be numbered, that would be very helpful. So we're looking in this report at the second priority of the 3 priorities that I have in the police and crime plan. The 3 priorities are protecting vulnerable people, treating people fairly, and this one, which is tackling crime and anti-social behaviour. Because it's quite a long report, I'm assuming, Mark, that everybody has read the report. So if I could just take you to one or two things in the report, and if you would like to comment on them, if that's the way to do it. And then if there are things that you think I've missed that are really brought to all our attention, we can do that. So if I can take you first of all to, let's have a look, page 15. Page 15. And in the middle there are some bullet points, problem solving and so on. Talks about emerging crimes. I wonder if you could just say something to us about cybercrime, what the force is doing around cybercrime, and and link that to what's happening at the moment with COVID-19. And you were saying earlier that some of the more traditional acquisitive crimes is a falling away there. But perhaps this is one of the areas where there is a increased activity, people going onto the internet and getting up to no good there. Could you say something around cybercrime?
Yeah, will do, Commissioner. I'll deal with the COVID-specific thing if you can, and then I'll pass to Tim, who will answer on the general terms about the subject matter of the paper. Yeah, it's a good prompt, Commissioner. I did meant to say, in terms of the crime types that there's been increases of, certainly cyber-enabled crime and fraud. I think parents need to be incredibly mindful about increased activity by online paedophiles and predators, to make sure that if kids are inside, spending an awful lot of time on the devices, that parents are applying the normal rules of keeping an eye on who they're dealing with, because that cybercrime is seeing an increase. The other one that I'd like to mention as well is people...
But someone at my flat door.
people seeking to scam members of the community, particularly in some cases elderly people. We have seen, sadly, a number of instances such as that, where people have been approaching folk, offering to disinfect the gardens and the like, and we can all imagine the scenario that then plays out with them. So I think certainly the increases online stuff, I think the increases of bogus official type distractions on older people, cons around things purporting to be disinfectant or cleansing stuff that don't do what it should do, because sadly criminals will, like good businesses, morph their efforts into things that present themselves as an opportunity. People do need to be mindful of those types of crimes as we move our way through the crisis. So if I deal with that, and then I'll hand over to Tim for the specific point about cyber and the rest of the report.
Sure.
Okay, Commissioner, it's Tim Former speaking. So just in terms of the general problem solving, as you'd expect, and as the death of the Chief has alluded to, we are constantly monitoring reported crime and incidents coming through the door to look at how crime trends are changing. As you're well aware, with the neighbourhood policing capability that we've built up with partners over the past 3 years, we've got embedded problem solving now right across all our districts, and that's fully embedded. But it is absolutely appropriate that given the dynamic situation that we're now facing with, that we very quickly adapt that. And by virtue of the force tasking processes that are embedded, both at a force-wide level and at a local district level, we've got the infrastructure to do that. So, we have seen, as you've heard, an increase in fraud offences, but we have also seen an increase in commercial burglaries. Not a massive increase, but we have seen an increase, and that is exactly what I'd expect to see, given the fact that most businesses are unoccupied and most houses are occupied. So all our neighbourhood policing teams have got taskings around patrol plans, around town centres, around commercial premises. All our neighbourhood policing teams have got patrol plans that give effect to understanding who the vulnerable victims are that live in their respective areas, to make sure that we can minimise to the greatest possible degree the vulnerability of both people and premises to people who might seek to take advantage of them in these difficult times that we now face. So problem solving is very embedded within the force now. We have a very solid neighbourhood policing structure that's firmly embedded with partners at a local level, and we're quite confident in our ability to be able to recognise long-standing trends in crime, to be able to adapt them dynamically to deal with a changing situation, and to be able to recognise new crime types such as cybercrime going forward.
Thank you very much. Can I keep to that page, on page 15 that is, and the next but one bullet point down, promoting the right culture. You talk there about the influx of new recruits that are coming into the force. I just wonder if you could say a word
Well, certainly, if we just talk a little bit about promoting the right culture, and I'll come on to new police officers landing. I mean, as you're aware, I've only moved portfolio to local policing this week. But where we are as a force now is that neighbourhood policing is not part of what we do, it's what we do. And the force is very proactive and has problem solving in neighbourhoods, dealing with the issues that matter most to the communities of South Yorkshire, and dealing with them in a way that visibly makes a difference. That is actually at the forefront and the core of what we deliver as a local police service. You compare that to where we were 3 years ago, when we were largely a reactive force, and the culture of our officers couldn't be more different in some ways. Officers at that time, 3 years ago, were very much turning up, dealing with what was in front of them and moving on to the next issue. By having a neighbourhood policing infrastructure with officers who are dedicated to problem solving in local communities, that has changed. So when you look at our neighbourhood policing teams now, and it is about culture, officers and those who lead officers at a local level are thinking first and foremost about how do I prevent this happening again? How is this part of a trend? How is this an individual or a series of individuals or a premises that is vulnerable, and how can I make them less vulnerable, whether that's us working alone or with partners? And that is a shift in culture. And if I move on and talk a little bit about the influx of new officers, RDH is still operating at the moment, and we are still, in terms of these new police officers that landed in February, they are still scheduled in at the moment. That may change depending on the situation as it develops over the summer. But in terms of those new police officers who've arrived in February and the influx of those officers into neighbourhoods, we are continuing to staff up our neighbourhood policing teams, as we promised the public of South Yorkshire that we would do. But as with all things at the moment, with the current crisis and the current public health issues, all that is subject to the situation as it changes going forward.
Thank you. But at the moment, we've no reason to suppose that the influx, as you put it, of the new recruits, that's being interrupted unduly or halted.
Not unduly. I don't know whether the Dep or the Chief.
Yes, I can come in on that. It's the Chief. No, at this stage, not. We have sustained all of the infrastructure, all of the processes that are involved in the continuing recruitment campaign, and then bringing people in, training them, and what have you. So all of the infrastructure and the processes, as I say, remain in place. And at this stage, we have no reason to doubt that those people who are slated to join the force will not arrive when they are due. There may, of course, be one or two occasions where people who we anticipate to come and join us themselves perhaps fall ill, and they need to take a temporary pause before they actually join. But these things will be managed in the margins. For the most part, it is our intention that we will sustain business as usual, continue to grow the force, and we will continue to apply those resources in the way that we've already established.
Thank you.
Commissioner, if I could just come back in, I think that the final point I would make on this in terms of neighbourhood policing, and it just picks up on the point that the Dep and the Chief made earlier. At the moment, resilience is good across the workforce, and we are still operating a full service, and that means that our neighbourhood teams are very much manifest in our communities and are tasked around the problems of today. So, as I said, because they're still operating and functioning to the fullest degree, they are now dynamically tasked around things like commercial burglaries, dealing with doorstep crime, and making sure that we protect people and communities.
Thank you very much. Moving to page 16, the second paragraph down, I was intrigued there to read about the designing out crime officers. You have two. I wonder whether these were part of the Safer Street bid to the Home Office working in Hexthorpe. If so, then if you could say a word about that, because it does seem to me what they're doing is really good, really important, good example of partnership working with the local authority, Home Office, with the police, and whether there were any plans to take this further across South Yorkshire.
Well, I think probably what I'd have to say to Commissioners, I'm not certain of the funding and how that was funded. What I would say is this, is that we're absolutely clear that the focus of crime prevention and problem solving is a professional discipline for the force, and will continue certainly moving forward now to develop a level of consistency across our neighbourhood policing teams that represents the very, very best in crime prevention. So what this represents is just one example where we've sought to use academic qualifications and academic specialist training to professionalise the work that our officers do, and this is reflects what we've done in a number of different areas. So we've done it in public protection in terms of investigating vulnerability. We're doing it in designing out crime. We've got officers at all levels engaged with the Cambridge University Masters in Policing programme. So we will continue to take opportunities wherever we can to work with local academic institutions to make sure that our officers are at the absolute forefront of police professional practice, to make sure that the service that we provide is absolutely comparable, if not better, than any other force in the country.
Tim, if I could just butt in there, just with the specifics of the sort of DOCO role. The roles pre-existed the bid for the Safer Street money. Obviously, this talks to professionalising those particular roles. But what is absolutely the case is that their very specific expertise maps perfectly into what the Safer Streets program is all about, which is all very much about situational crime prevention, target hardening, designing out crime. That is precisely the role, and so it is the professionalising of that role taken together then with what our neighbourhood infrastructure does to carry forward the aspirations that are baked into the Safer Streets program that will, I think, bring us to a very good place in terms of outcome.
I think that's right, yes, and I think we'll keep an eye on the DOCOs, you call them up, and see how that develops. Preventative work of this kind is so important. Thank you. Shall we go to page 17? I wonder if you could say a word around, this is the second half of the page, rehabilitation of offenders, reduction of reoffending, that's the heading. To talk a little bit about the integrated offender management and the early release of prisoners into our communities. This is an area, I think, which the public naturally get anxious about. If you could say something around who these people are, how they're managed, and so on, because this is it's a partnership effort. It's not just the police; it's a whole range of agencies. Could you say a word around that?
So integrated offender management now is a fairly well. It's nothing new. It's been around for a significant number of years now, where you have the police, probation, and other partners working together to manage offenders and offending behaviour in the community. And it's really important to understand that those offenders are identified by all the partners coming together through the local offender management panel to actually decide which offenders need to be managed in that way. Wind the clock back probably only 4 or 5 years, almost every offender that was being managed by integrated offender management would be serious acquisitive crime offender, burglars, people convicted of robbery. And that was done to the exclusion of those who sometimes commit crime against very vulnerable people. So, potentially domestic violence offenders, people who are parts of organised crime groups, and responsible for perpetrating violence that puts fear in the hearts of the community. That's very much not the case now. You will find amongst the cohort of ILM offenders a range of people who have been convicted of a range of different offences. And what happens as part of that is those partners work together to identify the causes of that offending behaviour, what's required to keep people on the straight and narrow and to prevent them offending, and to actually bring some structure back to their lives to allow them to become productive members of society again. There's also enhanced intelligence sharing around those offenders. So if they start to engage in behaviours that's likely to lead them back into offending patterns, something can be done about it. And integrated offender management has very much been a success and a real key part of how we've managed high harm offenders within the community for a number of years now.
If you look on page 18, there's also a mention there of registered sex offenders and their release into the community as well. I wonder if you could say a word around that, linking the two together, as to how these are being managed, again, as a reassurance for the public.
So, obviously, you're well aware of the concept of registered sex offenders. If people are convicted of a qualifying offence, they have to register on the sex offenders register. That can be for a limited period of time, or it can be for life, and that's effectively dependent on the seriousness of the trigger offence. They are managed by specialist officers who've had a degree of specialist training. They're known as Mossavo officers. They visit offenders using a variety of risk assessment techniques to assess the likelihood of those offenders actually committing further offences. The type of officer that will undertake those visits and the frequency of those visits will depend very much on the risk attached to that offender. As you'd expect, given the numbers involved, different risk assessments pertain to different offenders. There's no getting away from the fact that the number of people on the register has risen in recent years, and a significant factor in that has been the rise of sexual offending online, indecent images, that sort of offending that's seen a national and international rise. What we do in South Yorkshire, which replicates a number, what is done in many forces up and down the country, is we've provided training to all our local neighbourhood teams. So where appropriate, low-risk offenders are managed by the local neighbourhood policing team. That frees up capacity for our specialist Mossavo officers to concentrate on those which present a higher risk and who inevitably have convicted of more serious offences. Whilst the whole process is managed by our Mossavo team, the fact that we now have a proper local neighbourhood policing structure with local accountability and local ownership of local problems, that allows us to bring far greater capacity than we certainly used to be able to deal with this issue. As I say, it is an area of business where demand has continued to rise. I think all our professional experience tells us that will continue to rise in the future. But what we do have now here in South Yorkshire is an effective way of managing it, and by making it part of core policing, overseen by specialist officers, we've been able to develop the capacity that we need to manage it more effectively.
how that will be managed and whether that's going to seriously impact on your capacity to deal with all of this.
Well, there's obviously, and you'll have seen in the press, there's very strict guidelines around which prisoners are likely to be released, and it, in essence, is those that present a low risk and are towards the very end of the sentence. I mean, we're working with probation and the prison service to understand what that might mean for South Yorkshire, and it's still very much a moving feast at the moment. But certainly the guidance that I've seen that's come out from central government and from the prison service at the moment is that it is those offenders who present a very low risk and that are at the end of their sentence anyway.
And they're released on licence and they're tagged, GPS tagged, are they? Is that?
That's our understanding, and obviously, we deal with tagged offenders all the time, and you will see in the body of the report here that we do the voluntary tagging with offenders, where that will assist them to not associate with old criminal associates. We're well used to dealing with offenders that are tagged.
Yes, it's just whether the numbers are such that it really just sort of test your capacity. Okay. We could spend time on quite a lot of things here, but unfortunately I don't think we have the time. So can I move you on to page 21? And you talk there, and you've talked quite often about understanding the demand that's on the force. And on that page, just above the heading, Public Health Approach to Crime, that paragraph there, the final paragraph of the section above, you talk about having got the demand side understood, and that then leads to changes in the workforce mix. I just wonder if you could say a word around how that works. You talk particularly about specialist areas, and I wondered whether, having examined that demand, recognised these specialist areas, whether that was resulting in some change in the workforce in terms of specialisms.
Yeah.
To bring people in, whether the training is acknowledges that, whether the people are brought in acknowledges that, or whether things are at a generic level of training and recruitment, and then people specialise afterwards. Do you see what I'm getting at?
No, well, I'll just give you an example, Commissioner. The DEP alluded to before, we talked about domestic violence. 3 years ago, when we implemented the crime review, we created public protection teams at each district that dealt with all aspects of safeguarding both children and adults. We did a huge amount of demand work to underpin the structure of those teams and put the right number of people in those in that area. The simple fact of the matter is the domestic abuse and high-risk domestic abuse has continued to rise and rise exponentially over the last 3 years. Because we have the right infrastructure within BC&I to be able to monitor that, we've taken a decision now that we need to create separate domestic abuse teams to manage the response to domestic abuse, to make sure that we maintain the capacity to continue to deal with child abuse and child exploitation. So we're in the process now of creating specialist domestic abuse teams that will sit and work alongside our broader public protection teams, but will allow us to bring greater capacity to that. Another example where we've created an additional specialist capability was the domestic violence protection notice team sat within legal services. You I know will recall that 3 years ago, HMIC looked at the extent to which the force was using domestic violence protection notices to protect vulnerable victims of abuse, and it wasn't good enough, and there wasn't enough use of that very useful and effective power to protect victims. Well, we've gone over that 3-year period to being one of the forces that used it the least to one of the forces that use it the most, and we have other forces now coming to look at our systems and processes in how we manage that. But the flip side was that meant a huge abstraction for officers who would be otherwise investigating crime, going to court to get domestic violence protection orders, and often that could take a full day at court. So we've created a specialist team that sit within legal services, and their role is to take that away from our teams and create extra capacity. So that's just one example where we've got the ability to recognise demand and adapt our structures, particularly given the fact that we're having an uplift in officers moving forward. The next one, without a doubt, is digital forensics, and work is underway now to look at future likely demand for digital forensics. We manage it at the moment within our digital forensics team and with a substantial outsourcing budget, but the digital forensics marketplace is quite fragmented. I certainly think that there's much more we can do in-house with further investments, and we're starting to look at what that might need to be in terms of technology, in terms of people, and how we embed the ability to manage digital forensics not only as a specialism at the centre, but as part of core policing at the district level. They're all projects that are in train now, in line with the point that's made in the paragraph, recognising where future spikes in demand are likely to come, and recognising how our infrastructure needs to adapt to the challenges of the future.
Thank you very much. There's nothing else I wanted to pick out from the report. I could pick out lots of things from the report and ask questions around, but I wonder whether there was anything that you felt you particularly wanted to say that you haven't said in here, or whether we can leave that for the moment.
I think I just perhaps want to mention some of the violence reduction units bits in there, because I just think I'll just mention it very quickly. That obviously you set up the violence reduction unit as a result of the bid to government last year. That's now been funded again for the next year. Custody navigators is one that I think has real value, and it makes reference in there to we've now got custody navigators involved, and they engage 34 detainees for a violence-related offence. 12 of those are now receiving ongoing support, and I just think that that's a promising start in terms of the violence reduction unit that we need to build on going forward. One of the consequences of COVID-19 is that we've not seen the levels of violence associated with the nighttime economy, because there hasn't been a nighttime economy. But certainly, as we move forward and as we get over this crisis, I think that building on the Navigators programme through the VIU will be a key aspect of our long-term approach to problem-solving serious violence. So I just wanted to highlight that.
Yes, thank you very much. I think you're right, and having seen that operating in Scotland, in Glasgow, very successfully, the Navigator scheme, and to see it extended from the hospitals to the custody suites has been good. Of course, all this is suspended, isn't it, in the custody suite at the moment with COVID-19. And you're right, yes, £1.6 million is, we've just made a bid for a further 1.6 million for the coming financial year for the violence reduction unit, and that is a huge partnership involving local authorities, CCGs, public health, National Health Service, the youth offending teams, and so on. And I think that's working very well as a preventative approach to stop serious violence in our communities. So thank you very much for that. Well, thank you very much for the report itself. Did anybody else want to add anything or say anything around it? Shall we then move on to force performance, the second report, which is number 10 on the agenda, and this is concerning Barnsley. And Sarah, I think this is you, if you're still with us.
Yes, good morning.
First of all, thank you very much indeed for the report, and it's packed with information, and I'm assuming everybody's read it. So what I will do, if you're happy with that, is do what I did with the previous one, just pick out a few things, and then see whether there's something that I missed that you particularly wanted to draw attention to. Can I take you first then to page 28, around response time? So I was very interested in this, and I think the public will be interested in this as well. You've obviously improved response times last time from Rotherham, we had a similar mention of response times improving. And I just wondered if you could say a word about how you did it and whether it's sustainable.
I think at the last tab in December we discussed at length the response time to PC, and I mentioned it in this report that significant improvements have been made, particularly in that first kind of 6 months of activity around response time. And then it's a stabilisation and identifying marginal gains to continue to make those improvements. We've been focusing on pretty much for the beginning of 2020. So you see a slight slowing down of those improvements, but improvements nonetheless. How that's been achieved, it's a continuation of scrutinising where we're deploying our staff, making sure that we're getting people out as soon as the shift begins into those higher demand areas so that we don't lose time in travel, for example. It's also about making sure that the process between ourselves and Atlas Support, who receive the call and then pass it to our staff, is as efficient as possible. So it's a combination of the two different factors, I would suggest, that are enabling us to continue to make marginal gains. I believe we will seek and strive to continue to make those improvements, but I do believe that we are now at that point of stabilisation. We're consistently below our target, both for emergency and priority on our median average. So it's around keeping it there and doing our very best to improve it even more for victims of crime, to make sure we get there as soon as we possibly can to assist them when they need us.
Thank you. Can I just ask, I'm not sure if this is Tim or who it would be, whether what we've read now about what's happening in Rotherham and here in Barnsley, as far as response times go, is that replicated across the piece?
Yeah, Commissioner Mark, Deputy, I'll answer that one if I can. Yes, it is. I think it's really pleasing to see that across the force we've seen an improvement in response times across all the districts, both in the emergency response times, where we aim to get there within 15 minutes, but also the priorities as well, that we aim to get in there within an hour. It's really good to say that it's been sustained. I think, as Sarah said, we're really in marginal gain territory now. I don't see those coming much better, although I do think they are very good and would stand us very well in comparison with other forces. Final thing I'd emphasise is that the gains have been made, I think, by good management, understanding issues, intelligent assessment of where the demand comes from, so that we get the right resource in the right in the right place at the right time. I think the rollout of mobile technology, in which the force made a significant investment with new laptops and phones, means that officers increasingly can stay out of the police stations. They're not being pulled back to do administrative tasks, which means they're available in the right areas to deal with jobs as they come in. So the final thing I'd say is the emphasis I have continually made, supported by the Federation, and I'm confident the district commanders get the point. This is absolutely not about officers driving faster. Yes, we want them to get there quickly, but we want them to get there safely. This is about understanding demand, getting the right resource in the right place, and making sure that we do it effectively by reducing the lead time from the call coming in, being assessed, and then a resource being dispatched. So I think we're in a good place. I think, yes, we can maintain it. I don't think it's realistic to expect more significant gains from what we've already got, because we've probably got the process pretty much as slick as we're going to get it.
Thank you. On page 29, Sarah, you talk about neighbourhood policing and the creation of a 6th neighbourhood team. I know this has been very well received in the areas of Rockingham, Woyland, Darfield and Woolwell. Does that bring you to the neighbourhood team structure as you would want it to be? That's it now, is it?
Yeah, absolutely, yes. As I noted in the report, it's my perspective, very much the final step in the structural reinvigoration of neighbourhood policing. And that's primarily around alignment with our partners. There are 6 area councils in across Barnsley district, and we now have the 6 neighbourhood teams that can operate alongside them, work with our colleagues in BMBC and other partners to really get to grips with demand reduction, identifying those within our communities who are vulnerable, and putting in place measures to support them and mitigate that threat to them. So it's a really welcome addition to our neighbourhood portfolio. I've communicated with Steph Peacock MP and obviously the elected members around this, and it has been warmly welcomed. And that's primarily because the 4 wards that are articulated there are high demand and lower confidence areas. So it's really critical that we get into there and start building up public confidence through increased visibility and tackling those issues that affect our communities the most.
And they'll be coming out of Hoyland Police Station.
The COVID crisis has changed things slightly. They were still operating out of Old Thorpe because we are awaiting the renovations of Hoyland Police Station that hasn't been in use for several years. However, due to the social distancing guidelines that we are adhering to, we're making use of all the space that we've got just to protect our staff and then the wider community. So we've had some fast and quick repairs done to a small part of Hoyland to make it serviceable for the team. So they are actually in Hoyland Police Station now. They will probably have to move out again to get the full renovations done, but for a short period and then permanently in that location.
Okay.
Commissioner, we did a soft launch of the Hoyland team back at the end of February, and we are planning to do a launch of the Hoyland Police Station as and when they are permanently in place, and hopefully when this national emergency has passed, when it's safe for people to come and celebrate the opening of Hoyland.
Yes, and it'll certainly be very well received because we've had a lot of favourable comment from that community or those communities around there. Thank you. Can I take you to page 30? We talked a bit earlier in this meeting about domestic abuse. I don't want to sort of repeat all of that. I just wondered, from your perspective, we focus very much on the victims of domestic abuse, whether you wanted to say anything about the offenders, what we do in relation to them. This seems to me just something that we also need to get our minds around. Could you say something around that?
And we absolutely are. I believe Mr. Corber just talked about the LOMP procedure, so the Local Offender Management Procedure panel, and the cohort over the last 3 to 5 years. We've made a concerted effort to increase the cohort in our offender management teams, working with the LOMP to expand that cohort of offenders. So it does now include DA offenders on top of SAC offenders. So there is concerted effort across the partnership to look at repeat victims and repeat offenders, so that we're breaking the cycle from a victim perspective, but also from an offender perspective.
Alan, can I just come in there? Sarah, it's Michelle Buttery. Just to add there to that, Commissioner, you have through your county-wide forum co-commissioned with local authorities the Inspire to Change programme for perpetrators of domestic abuse. I meant to include it earlier in the update around services around domestic abuse. We understand that the service provider for Inspire to Change for perpetrators of domestic abuse are doing all sorts of creative things to ensure that the training goes ahead in the current environment that can be delivered to people using technology. So those programs are continuing.
Thank you, Michelle. I was just about to mention Inspire to Change. So we have a spectrum of tools with which to deal with offenders, and the lowest level being Inspire to Change, where we're not pursuing a criminal justice outcome, where it is voluntary, but we do our very best to raise awareness of the Inspire to Change, make referrals into the Inspire to Change programme for those that we are not prosecuting for a whole variety of reasons. So we have seen an increase in our referrals to Inspire to Change, but then we also have attrition visits. So you mentioned the rise in DA, particularly in light of the COVID crisis. We in Barnsley have refreshed. A number of times a year we have key pinch points around domestic abuse. Unsurprisingly, they tend to be towards Christmas, when people are staying at home more and drinking. Tends to be more alcohol, and also during football and other big sporting events. So we already have plans plans in place that we can refresh, and we in Barnsley started that last week, and that includes attrition visits to repeat domestic violence offenders. So that's a preventative tool to make them aware that we're still keeping an eye on them, and that that we're ensuring that their victim is safeguarded, and that their behaviour is mitigated to the best extent that we possibly can. So we've got that plan around proactivity around both victims and offenders, and then up to obviously a concerted effort to charge offenders of domestic abuse. Now, we all know academic research suggests that the victim has had offences committed against them on numerous occasions prior to calling the police, and therefore our presumption and our efforts go into securing an appropriate outcome, criminal justice outcome for all DA. And you will note further on in the report I talk about improvements in our outcome rates over the last 3 months. So that's at the far end of the spectrum where we look for a charge where they will go to court and get a conviction for the offences they've committed against their partner or ex-partner in the vast majority of the cases. So there is a broad spectrum of activity to summarise, both in respect of victims and offenders. So it's not just victim focused, it's across the board.
Yeah. Thank you very much for that. Can we move to page 32? I'm sorry this is a bit of a gallop through, but page 32 at the top you talk about drugs. And this is an area which is of intense interest and concern to the public, of course. And you talk about the flow of intelligence from communities into the force. I wonder if you could say a word about how that happens. I mean, in what ways do people give you intelligence?
They can pass intelligence to officers, they can in, they can go through Crime Stoppers. So there is an array of mechanisms that members of the public can use to feed intelligence in. What we found, and I think it's consistent with many other areas like South Yorkshire, but nationally, is that certain communities don't provide as much information to police as others. So what we've done is we've broken down our intel submissions, looked at where our high demand areas are, compared that with our intelligence flow, and then worked with our communities to build that confidence in them to start telling us about what's happening. And we have seen an uplift in the intelligence submissions as a direct result of that concerted effort. Again, as Mr. Forber said, our neighbourhood teams are integral to all of this, and they are the ones that are doing that engagement and confidence building piece that enables us to then build that greater intelligence picture.
So this is the neighbourhood teams going out and making contact with communities.
But it's the neighbourhood teams just engaging with people during their daily activities.
Yeah.
And then we have a team which I've mentioned in here, Fortified Team. You'll recognise that brand. It's a brand that's been used across South Yorkshire, and they are the ones that will act on that intelligence.
Yeah. Thank you. Just below that, you talk about antisocial behaviour, and you reference Goldthorpe and Bolton upon Dearne. You give an example of this group of 12 to 15-year-olds and what you were able to do there, and then a number of bullet points there as to what the force had done. I just wonder whether there is any additional youth provision now in the area, whether that's been part of what's happened, or is that still lacking in this area?
Well, interestingly, I should have mentioned it, to be fair, in the report. EPIC, which is the Tri-Local Authority Initiative around child exploitation, which you're obviously aware of, they are quite active in this particular area because they were focusing on, we'd highlighted Goldthorpe, Bolton on Dearne, its boundary with both Doncaster and Rotherham, that Dearne triangle, as being in need of extra support around young people. So EPIC's been working there for the last year with outreach workers, working with young people, as well as delivery of inputs into larger secondary schools throughout that area. So yes, there is some provision around outreach work from a youth services perspective. is the data from 18 and 19. So where we've got the arrow points with the percentages. I was saying that we didn't obviously have end of year figures when I wrote this. That we have been working really hard to maintain and actually improve the position to achieve year-on-year reductions. And I'm really pleased that last week I was able to get the end-of-year figures, and we achieved a further 10% reduction in residential burglary over 2019-20, and a 4%, so a smaller percentage reduction, but a reduction nonetheless in our commercial burglaries throughout 2019-20. So I'm really pleased with those results, and as a direct result of our activity throughout our communities, engaging with our communities, getting them on board, doing all the preventative work, tuning, and right through to the other end of the spectrum, tackling those recidivist offenders that we know commit a vast crime in a very short time. So I think it's an accumulation of all of those different factors brought together that's enabled us to make year-on-year reductions in those key crime types that affect our victims, our communities, to some extent the most.
Yeah, and are you seeing, as we've noticed elsewhere, a rise now in commercial burglary?
Yes, we are. Yes, we are. Seen a slight rise through March since businesses were advised to close and then required to close. So we have seen a displacement of criminal activity from residential burglary into commercial burglary. But as I said, with the domestic abuse plan, we 2 weeks ago, when we started to see this change in behaviour, which was predicted, we launched our commercial burglary plan, which gives direction to all staff from all portfolios across the district, to give them tasks and actions to complete on a daily basis, again focusing from the preventative work right through to the bringing offenders to justice. I've also worked with the Chamber of Commerce and highlighted the need. I know that Carrie's team, the comms team, have put out advice, so crime prevention advice to businesses that are shut. So I've shared that with the Chamber of Commerce across Barnsley and asked them to share it with their members, so that we are really getting that out there to help people to help themselves.
Yeah, thank you. And moving on to page 35, most serious violence at the bottom of page 7.2. And you talk about the increase in organised crime gangs in the Barnsley area. Could you say a word about that and what you think is going on here?
It's not an increase in the organised crime group. It's an increase in, over Christmas and January, it's an increase in incidents, so violent incidents, to the small number of OTCs that we do have in Barnsley. There were a couple of weekends where we had a number of incidents linked to the same individuals who appeared to be going on a bit of a rampage. They were arrested within hours of those incidents taking place, and the key individuals have been charged and remanded. So I feel very sure and confident that has subsequently reduced as a result of our intervention.
Yeah, thank you. No, I misread it, so you're right. You talked about increased incidents. Thank you. Over the page on page 36, again, I was interested in your financial team and your investigators there, embedded locally, as you say. It's a small team of 2 who are obviously doing some good things. Could you just say a quick word about that?
Yes, we've had them for a year or so now, and we've managed to secure a very experienced confiscator from an adjoining force who is extremely proactive, knowledgeable, and able to maximise the use of the legislation about making people involved at the highest levels within OCGs and criminal gangs are not benefiting as much and profiting as much as they have done previously. So you'll see, I've just given you some ballpark figures around what improvements have been made in the last year. And as a result of that, the senior leadership group have supported and approved a proposal to increase the capacity of the team so that we can continue to exploit these opportunities and seize them and increase our ability to take the assets and money from people that have obtained them through criminality. So all in all, it's a good story, that one.
It is a good story.
Commissioner,
I wonder whether it's going to be replicated in other parts of the...
Commissioner, can I come in there? What I'd say to you is, what Sarah's talked about in terms of financial investigation at Barnsley is as good as I've seen for a district financial investigation unit anywhere I've worked. The team there, under the leadership of Sarah and Paul Murphy, the DCI there, have done a cracking job. And absolutely, I'll be very clear with the other districts, is that what has been created at Barnsley is the standard that's been set. And I want to see that replicated across the board. And certainly, the other districts are aspiring to that now. And we are starting to see some of the other districts starting to catch up, and the overall volume of seizures and confiscations is starting to increase.
Very good, thank you. Sarah, there's nothing else I wanted to ask. Well, lots of things I wanted to ask about, but because of the time, I won't ask about. Was there anything that you felt you wanted to draw our attention to that we've missed? Remembering that we have read the report, of course.
No, of course. Thank you. No, I wanted to raise our domestic abuse results, which I think we've covered. The neighbourhood expansion, which we've also covered, and our burglary results. So I think I've covered everything I want to. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, I'd got a note on my own pack to raise domestic abuse at that point, but I think we had covered it pretty well beforehand. Thank you very much indeed. Again, a very good and comprehensive report. Thank you. So, moving...
questions,
sorry, yeah.
All right, if I leave for your conference call.
Well, of course. Yes, of course.
Thank you very much.
Very much. Thank you. Moving quickly on then from force performers to...
Has left the conference.
Update and item 11. Michelle, focus of activity, the duration of the coronavirus, 39 to 44.
Thanks, Commissioner. So it is Michelle on the line. There's a cover report.
Before you start, Michelle, can I apologise to everyone for the numbering in this report? Having ticked off Una Jennings for getting her numbers all over the place at our last pub, we managed to do this spectacularly ourselves in this report, so apologise for that. Michelle.
You've stolen my thunder, because that's what I was going to start with, Commissioner. There is something to my own defence. There is something going on with my IT that is where formatting is going awry. I'm amending things and it's not preserved in its transmission. So we're trying to get an IT fix for that. It is affecting how things are coming to me as well. So if I cite sections that are different on other people's, apologies. That's the reason. So, Commissioner, this is
one apology is enough if sincere. Keep going.
It is sincere. There's a cover report there for readers that explains that when you decided not to refresh your police and crime plan this year, two things were envisaged. One, that there wasn't this COVID-19 issue on the horizon, and two, that there would be PCC elections in May. Both of those things have affected us in that we felt the public, and particularly police and crime panel, needed to know how your business is going to focus to preserve your statutory responsibilities and discharge them as business as usual as much as possible, but to focus on what matters. And so the cover report has a section 3.3, hopefully, yes, in everybody's, a bullet point list of what of your statutory responsibilities have sharp focus with wording that are there. So it's around ensuring the chief has sufficient resources. It's ensuring that you are the voice of the public in looking over the police force as you do, and the new emergency police powers are appended to the cover report for the public to note. There's the partnership working, where you are a convener of partners. So community safety, violence reduction and criminal justice are all coming to the fore in different ways to consider business continuity and commissioning and co-commissioning. And we've mentioned some of that as we've gone through the agenda so far. So the plan that is annexed as Annex 1 goes into those bullet points in a bit more detail. I'm not going to go through those, but it does go into the police arrangements that have already been articulated well by the chief already. Then the second annex is a report from Fiona. So in relation to you being the voice of the public at the moment, Fiona's report, that's Fiona Topless, your engagements and communications manager, will collate information that we are receiving into the office from members of the public, partners, police and crime panel members, via correspondence, complaints, or Fiona's team are continuing their engagement activity, which is part of your responsibilities, Alan. But they're doing it via electronic means, obviously. So they are still accessing the community groups, and they are still doing surveys and social media activity, etc. That information is then being fed into this Public Accountability Board, but also the force. And Fiona will provide the themes that have developed since this COVID-19 issue began for us, and then she can be asked any questions in relation to that. But we will keep bringing those arrangements via a report from Fiona to forthcoming Public Accountability Boards and continuing the activity that is described in Annex 1 on your behalf. That's all I was going to say, Alan, unless you want to add anything.
No, thank you very much. So this is item 11 and 11A, Annex 1. Are there any questions or comments from anybody around that?
Alan, it's Andrew Lockley, Chair of the Ethics Panel. Do you want me to say briefly what the Ethics Panel is going to do in this new situation? Is this the point at which I should talk about that briefly?
Since you've launched up, Andrew, I should keep going.
Okay. So you've asked the Ethics Panel to provide assurance to yourself and the public as to how the new legislative powers will be used in South Yorkshire. We're feeling our way towards doing that. I hope to be able to conclude what the tasks will be in the next few days with the help of the panel. But basically, we think that initially there will be three tasks. The first will be understanding how we might support the force in its proportionate implementation of the new legislation. The second is understanding how the force will handle public reporting of alleged breaches and triaging process that no doubt goes on with that. And thirdly, and we've touched on this perhaps certainly in connection with domestic violence, understanding the approach taken to protecting vulnerable groups in the present context. Of course, that's much wider than domestic violence. But clearly, we need to be flexible and respond to whatever topics we are asked to deal with in order to provide assurance and indeed to advise the force as if we are requested to do so. So that's where we are at the moment.
Thank you very much. Anybody
Alan,
else?
Alan, it's Michelle again. It's important, we've all noted and discussed with force colleagues, it's important to note that governance and assurance arrangements should not in any way heed the force in going about handling this emergency situation. We're all seeking to be helpful and add value. If there are genuine issues the public and partners would like us to raise, if there are ethical issues that are genuinely going to help the force deal with this, fine. But we have all been very clear with each other and with force colleagues that we will seek to be helpful and support and not get in the way.
Thank you very much. And of course, in 3.3 on your cover report, those bullet points at the bottom, that's my wording there, the second bullet point down, that my role is to ensure on behalf of the public the police respond in ways that are necessary, sufficient, proportionate, ethical. And I think what I've heard this morning and what I've gathered in conversations we've had up to this point is that that is where our police force is at this moment in time. So thank you very much for that. Anything else on 11A? 11B then, which is the communications part of all of this, public engagement, communication activity. Fiona, did you want to say anything?
I don't think there's anything else to add to what's in the report, other than the fact that I think the public have been very positive about the force's reaction to the current situation and the steps that have been taken, very supportive of the work and the visibility that they're seeing from officers. That's coming through quite clearly on what we're hearing. And certainly just a few concerns from public around people adopting the guidance and adhering to it, which is the same as the national picture. But again, I think the force's response to that has been well received.
Yeah. And given the magnitude of what's going on, this is remarkable, and we just hope that it stays that way. I think that's everything under 11. 12 then is PCC decisions, pages 61 to 64. Michelle, is there anything there you want to draw attention to?
No, the report is there. Commissioner, I'll take it as read. If there's any questions, I'll do my best to answer. Sophie's on the line if there's any financial questions, but otherwise nothing from me.
Are there any questions? Okay, thank you very much. That was item 12. Item 13 is the Power Work Programme, if you can read it. And on pages 65 to 68. Anything there, Michelle?
Only that we're in a dynamic situation, Commissioner, and in terms of force reports coming forward, we'll liaise with the Deputy in relation to what's asked and what can be maintained business as usual. I think the public would still expect some element of exchange between you and the Chief on the COVID-19 situation as it's developing. But in terms of other asks of the force, we're going to keep a watching eye on what's possible. At the moment, everything is business as usual and reports are coming through, but we don't want to put undue pressure on the force to produce things that you're happy to relax.
Thank you. That was item 13. And item 14, any other business which has been notified? None has been notified, so there isn't any other business. Unless somebody really has something to say. Have we said everything we want to say, everybody? Are we all happy?
Yes, all happy.
Good. Well, thank you very much indeed. It has been, I say, it's a very extraordinary time we're living through, and it's an extraordinary meeting to hold in this way, but we're learning how to do this more and more. This must be the third or fourth meeting of this kind that I've chaired, and everybody's behaved themselves very well and been very cooperative and very good. So thank you very much indeed, everyone. The date of our next meeting is the 12th of May.